I explained last night, after interviewing Julia Gillard on Monday, we were hoping Tony Abbott would be available last night or tonight to balance the scales in the first week. Mr Abbott couldn't make it tonight. He's on another television program called Hey Hey It's Saturday, with Daryl Summers on their Red Faces segment. So his shadow treasurer, Joe Hockey, is here now to fill the breach. Joe Hockey, I understand that you were complaining today about Labor trivialising this election campaign. But before we get to that, are there any Paris Hilton lines you want to share with us tonight?
No, Kerry, and I think you're wrong also about Tony Abbott. I'm sure he's prepared to come on your program. It's just he hasn't been able to fit in your timetable because of existing commitments. So
he's agreed to come on next week. It's a pity he couldn't be here for the first, but that's there.
Sorry,
you go. Yeah.
We can't always get what we want, Kerry.
No, so our audience is what I was thinking of. So your point about the trivialisation, what is it?
Well, Kerry, I just don't think Julia Gillard has been subject to the same scrutiny as other people have been. And I think it's important that the Australian people have a good look at someone who is now the Prime Minister, who wants 3 years, and who is trying to airbrush the last 3 years.
So are you saying that the media isn't doing its job of scrutinising Julia Gillard in the way they're scrutinising Tony Abbott?
It's not for me to criticise the media, Kerry. I mean,
who is it?
Well, I think we all have a responsibility to do it. I don't know what Julia Gillard believes in. I really don't. This is the person that leads our country, has no policy on education, no policy on health, no policy on industrial relations, no policy on the economy, nothing to pay back debt.
Just hang on one second.
I don't know what she believes in. I really don't.
So no policy on industrial relations, but she introduced the Fair Work Act that you're now supporting.
But what is Julia Gillard's second term agenda?
Well, they've only just introduced the Fair Work Act. I imagine they'll spend a fair bit of their time making sure it works in practice.
Well, is that their policy?
I would have thought it was.
Oh, OK. So they're not going to have a policy. All they're going to do...
Well, you're not.
Well, if they are going to fix the problems of the first term, that is their second-term agenda. Labor's second-term agenda is to fix up all the problems of its first term. So that will keep them occupied, I can tell you.
So let me get this right. You're criticising them for not having a second-term agenda on industrial relations, while you are urging the Australian people to believe as a virtue that you are pledging not to have any policy on industrial relations at all.
No, we don't. Right? We're saying the Australian people want stability and certainty in industrial relations. They've had changes for the last 3 years. Longer than the last 3 years, for the last 7 years. There have been 3 major changes to industrial relations. We now accept the Australian people want certainty and stability out of Canberra. They've been on a wild ride. They've been on a ride with a new Prime Minister, only a few weeks old. They've had pink bat programs that are reverse school hall programs that have been a mess. They've got a boat policy that is in flummox. Give us back a proper government.
So would you say that the people of Australia were also on a wild ride with work choices?
Well, look, I think the Australian people made a decision at the last election. And, you know, it was an emphatic decision. We listened to them.
Well, when you talk about not knowing what Julia Gillard believes in, let's look at what you believe in. Industrial relations reform has been an article of faith for the Liberal Party for decades. You were an industrial relations minister, so was Tony Abbott. You ran work choices. But in the shadow of an election where the issue you've obviously judged could harm you, you've suddenly denied yourselves the right to implement any new policy at all in industrial relations for at least the next 3 years if you win government. Now, surely that's irresponsible if it's true, or cynical if it's not.
Oh, don't be cynical. I mean, the fact is, we see that the Australian people have made a decision about industrial relations. We want stability, Kerry. This is essential. Business has been through financial crises. They've been through volatility in interest rates. We are heading for uncertain times. The government has a massive deficit, massive debt. The Australian people are struggling under the burden of cost of living. They don't want radical change.
So when did you, as a party, come to that view that the Australian people and business want certainty on industrial relations and so therefore you won't make any changes?
Well,
when did you make that decision?
I can tell you, it was the shadow cabinet has no idea when election's called. Right? We've talked about it at length. In fact, I can tell you, you asked the question of me. I said it 2 days after we lost the last election. I said work choices is now dead. So I was the high priest at the burial,
Yes,
if you
but
like.
what you didn't say...
2 days after the last election.
But the government's legislation wasn't on the table. It hadn't passed through the parliament. It hadn't been enacted. The decision that you took in your shadow cabinet meeting, and I think you were going on to say it, just as Julia Gillard was about to announce her election, you made the decision suddenly that a coalition government would not touch any aspect at all of that legislation. Now, surely a part of the decision was a concern on your side that the ghost of work choices was still there to haunt you.
Well, if that's your take on it, Kerry, you're entitled to that.
Well, where have I got it wrong?
But it's wrong. I'll tell you where you got it wrong. We formed a view after speaking to business, small business, speaking to literally thousands of families around the country. Stop the uncertainty, stop the instability. We believe the government, this is what people said to us, we believe the government doesn't know what it's doing, but please stop changing everything. We are the parties that offer stability and certainty.
So this is legislation that the coalition has said would take Australia back to the 70s on industrial relations. Suddenly, after swathes of criticism from you and Tony Abbott, amongst others, about this legislation, that you think this seriously defective legislation deserves a fair go. Now, is that the real story?
Yes.
Can I suggest to you that it defies credulity?
Well, you can suggest whatever you want, Kerry. We have to provide stability. We have unemployment coming down, but not down as far as what the Labor Party inherited. Our number one priority is to pay back Labor's debt to stop the waste. If we don't do that, we are going to be in a world of hurt in the next few years.
So in the meantime, industrial relations, defective legislation, you believe. In fact, I think one word Tony Abbott has used to describe parts of it were evil. You, the great protectors of small business on the issue of unfair dismissals, are walking away from all of that for at least 3 years.
Can I tell you, Kerry, small business has said to me, we don't want any more changes. That's what they've said to me. I hear what they say.
Okay.
And therefore, we hear what they say. We want Australians to have confidence again, to be self-assured. And they're not going to get that under the Labor Party, which doesn't know how to properly govern the country.
So Tony Abbott has pledged, hand on heart and in writing, we saw the other day, that you'll make no changes to the Fair Work Act, but that pledge surely is already looking shaky thanks to the announcement you also made yesterday on more cuts to government spending. You're going to save $25 million by making unions pay the cost of secret ballots conducted for them by the Australian Electoral Commission. At present, under the Fair Work Act, unions get reimbursed by the Commonwealth for the cost of secret ballots imposed on them by the government. Now, you and Tony Abbott say that by making the change to reimbursement by the Electoral Commission to trade unions for secret ballots, by making the change with one piece of legislation, you're still not touching the Fair Work Act. Now, isn't that just a little bit tricky? Aren't you changing the intent of that act in that regard?
No. Hang on. We've been asked the question, are you changing the Fair Work Act? We've said no. The Labor Party is part of this counter spin campaign that they're rolling out. They're rolling out a shock and awe campaign on journalists, saying, hang on, there's a gaffe. There's a big gaffe in the coalition's, statements and policies and numbers. They're wrong. They're dead wrong.
Okay.
We will change the Electoral Act and we will deliver what we promise.
And what
you
is
see,
the
the
point?
difference between Labor and ourselves, Kerry, we promise what we can deliver. Labor never delivers.
Okay, so what will the change to the Electoral Act do?
It'll make sure that the unions pay, like clubs and everyone else, for the Australian Electoral Commission services.
Okay, but the Fair Work Act allows them to be reimbursed. So that section of the Act will be overrun by the changes you will make to the Electoral Commission Act. So you are using one Act to negate a section of this other Act that you say you're not going to touch for 3 years.
We have legal advice from a senior counsel that what we're doing is right. We're not changing the Fair Work Act. But so we can argue the legal technicalities. I don't know if it's great TV, but you can call that.
Well,
but we can argue the legal technicalities. The bottom line is, out of the total amount of gross savings that we're pulling out of the government, the Labor Party's picked up $25 million out of $46 billion. That is the equivalent of going to a household and say, I'm going to save you $46,000, and we end up arguing about $25.
Yeah. I heard you using that line
But it's
today.
an important point. It shows the biggest issue for Labor is protecting the union bosses who are funding this campaign. It's not about helping Australian families.
But the previous Howard government was partially reimbursing the unions for exactly the same thing.
Well, we were running surpluses. We were running surpluses. The country was in good shape. We had 4% unemployment. That's all gone. Surpluses are gone. We now have $90 billion of net debt. We're facing $40 billion of deficit this year. We're borrowing $100 million a day under Labor. Everyone has to pick up the pieces, and ultimately it's the taxpayers, and we've got to do the hard yards on that.
Okay. To me, what I'm putting to you is not a legal technicality, but a matter of common sense. The reason you are going or promising to change the Electoral Act is to stop unions being reimbursed for secret ballots. They have that right to reimbursement under another act called the Fair Work Act,